morning, brethren. We are now at the fourth statement of Jesus on the cross. I prepared a PowerPoint, but I fear that if I will use it, I might exceed the 10 minutes. Okay, so let's just see. Okay, I will not wait for the there it is. The fourth statement of Jesus on the cross is taken from Matthew 27, verse 46. About the ninth hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? You see, this expression of Jesus, this fervent cry carries with it an expression of a very deep abandonment that Jesus felt at the time when he was hanging on the cross on Calvary. This was a moment when Jesus Christ was taking upon himself the sin of the world. And therefore, because he was taking upon himself the sin of the world, he has to experience the full judgment of the Father upon sin. And because of that, he was the one being judged when it was supposed to be you and me. We are the sinners, not Jesus. He was an innocent man. He was an innocent son of God. He was sinless. Though he became man, he was born of a woman, and yet he was sinless. You know, your blood and my blood will not satisfy the wrath of God. Because we are sinners. And as such, we need a Savior to save us. And that Savior can only be the Son of God. In the fourth statement, when Jesus cried out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? You will see that way back, when we will go back a few chapters in the agony of the garden, which we call Gethsemane, Jesus addressed his Father, addressed God as my Father. In fact, he said, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, but not as I will, but as you will. Throughout his life on earth and his ministry, Jesus Christ has always enjoyed a sweet communion, a perfect communion with the Father. It was an unbroken communion. He said that I and the Father are one. He did not do anything, not even a second in his life did he work or do or think out of the presence and will of the Father. It was always in accordance to the will of the Father, aligned to the will of the Father. And yet, at the cross, instead of saying, my God, he said, instead of saying, my Father, he cried out, my God. My God. At this instance, when Jesus was carrying the weight of the sin of the world, the Father could not look upon him. Habakkuk 1:13 says, for thine eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. The Father cannot tolerate wrongdoing. He cannot look on evil. And at that moment, the sin of the world was upon Jesus. He was filthy. He was dirty. He was covered with sin. All our impurities was upon him. And so the Father needed to look away from him. But why did Jesus utter the cry, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? You know, this cry was quoted from Psalm 22. The first verse that says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you far from saving me? So far from my cry of anguish. So far from my cry of anguish. You see, somewhere around the Psalms, chapter 22, we will see the sequence of events that led to the death of Jesus Christ. In fact, in verse 7, it says, all those who see me ridiculed me. They hurled insult, shaking their heads. Verse 8, he trusts in the Lord. These were the people saying that. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. Verse 16 says, they pierced my hands and my feet. Verse 18, they divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. So you will see on Calvary, this is already in the New Testament. And yet, what happened to Jesus was referring back to the Old Testament in the book of Psalms 22. It was as if Psalm 22 was a script about the story of the death of Jesus Christ. When Jesus Christ cried out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? He cried out because there was a real forsakenness for our sake. Jesus at the time was our sin bearer. He was our substitute. He was experiencing the wrath of the Father. He was experiencing the judgment of the Father. The mystery is so great. It is so incomprehensible. Because in Calvary, for a brief moment, he was separated from his Father. The perfect union was broken. And it was because of you and me. It was because of our sins. The blood of bulls, the blood of goats in the Old Testament wasn't enough. They were not enough to satisfy the wrath of God. They were not enough to appease the furious divine anger of the Father. Because sin cannot be tolerated by the Father. You see, I think some of us might think that sin is so little. Some of us might even belittle it like, if I took a small amount of money, it's just a small sin compared to those who rob the banks, which has a bigger sin. But in the eyes of God, you violate one law, you violate the whole law. You are a sinner. There's no such thing as white lie, gray lie, black lie, red lie. Everything is a lie, then it's a sin. Everything that we do in violation of the command of God is a sin. So none of us can say, my sin is smaller than your sin. His sin is bigger than my sin. Therefore, I will be experiencing a smaller amount of punishment. No. In this world, yes, there are degrees of punishment depending on the kind of sin that you have committed. You can be sentenced for life imprisonment, execution, or maybe a few months, or maybe a few years. But that is the law of the world. But in the law of God, the wages of sin is death. A spiritual death. Spiritual death. And that can happen even when we are already living here. Without God, you are already spiritually dead. You are experiencing hell in its ultimate sense. Separation from God. Separation from the Father. There are some people, they think that they can live without God. Anyway, without Jesus, I'm okay. I'm rich, I have a good life, I'm successful, I'm famous. But you know what? At the end of your life, one way or the other, you will have to face judgment. You will have to make an accounting of what you have done on earth, of what you have done with your life on earth. So maybe here you may be experiencing heaven, but what about the life after? Will you be able to say that I can still experience heaven after my life here without Christ? I don't think so. When Jesus uttered, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? It was an expression of desolation and anguish of being denied the presence of the Father. He wasn't asking a question that needed an answer. Because if you will see the expression, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, there is a question mark. It wasn't that question that needed an answer. It was a pure expression of desolation and anguish. Why wasn't he asking for a question? For an answer, because Jesus knew beforehand what will happen to him. He knew what was he supposed to do. He knew what will be the end of all these things. In John 18 verse 4, it says, Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, It says, knowing all. It did not say some. It says, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked the soldiers. This was a detachment of soldiers, and the scenario was in Gethsemane when Judas came with the soldiers, the Roman soldiers who were about to arrest Jesus Christ. So he said to them, who is it you want? And they replied, Jesus of Nazareth. And he said, I am he. And he went to them. He knew. Jesus knew ahead of time what awaits him. He knew what he needed to do and why he was doing it. His Father has sent him for this, to give his life a ransom for many. To give his life. The way to salvation is so horrible on the part of Jesus. It was painful, heartbreaking, excruciating. And none of us can even survive the suffering that he suffered. None of us, not even with a split seconds or even a few moments, can survive what Jesus had to go through because of us. But you know what? The good news is, he laid his life for us. He obeyed his Father. The Father loves us so much that he gave his only begotten Son. His only begotten Son. Would any one of you give your son to die, your child to die for the sake of another person? Is there anyone here who would tell me, I would gladly give my daughter or my child for the salvation of one person? Would you? I don't think so. Even if I would obey. Remember Abraham? It was so hard for him to give Isaac. He was struggling, but he obeyed. But Abraham had an exceptional faith. But what about us? What are we made of? What kind of faith do we have? Can we do what Abraham did? Can we do what the Father did? Can we give someone we love the most? Can we sacrifice that someone so that the world can be saved? So that people can be saved? It's a very hard answer. A very hard question to answer. But that is the truth. You know, the cry of Jesus Christ was brought upon the pain of carrying the weight of the sins of the world. He had to suffer the separation from God, from his Father, because you know what? Your condition and my condition without God is ultimately like hell. It is separation from the Father. You would think, when I was pondering over this, when I was studying this, I was asking God, in fact, I was discussing this with my husband, and I was asking, why did Jesus Christ reach, why did he have to reach the point when he will have to experience a separation, a brief moment of separation from the Father? Why was this, the perfect communion was broken at that moment? Why wasn't it enough that he be nailed on the cross and then died? Why wasn't it enough? The answer could be found in Hebrews 2:17. It says here, therefore, in all things, he had to be made like the brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful priest in things pertaining to God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. In all things, he had to be made like us, because that is our real state. The true state of a person without Christ is being separated from the presence of God. And that in itself is hell. Sin is such an abomination before the eyes of God. It is an insult to his holiness. It is something that he cannot stand, he cannot tolerate, he cannot look. And when I sin and you sin, we all sin. We are impure in the eyes of God. Not even our righteous deeds is enough. In fact, they are just filthy rags. They are not enough. And so, because of this sin, Jesus felt that forsakenness. He experienced that anguish, that languishing pain that you and I were supposed to be experiencing. He took our place. He was our substitute. He was our sin bearer. He was the atoning sacrifice that can be only pleasing in the eyes of God. Not you, not me, not us, not anyone, not even the saints of saints in this world can please God and appease His wrath. It was only Jesus Christ. So my challenge to you, my brethren, my friends, if at one point in your life you feel forsaken and abandoned, look to Jesus. He has been where you have been. Look to Him. In this world, we experience a lot of abandonment. We experience being deserted by a friend, abandoned by a wife, abandoned by a mother, by a father, children being left at our doorsteps, unwanted, abandoned by their own mother, left by a husband, left by a wife, left to fend for yourself. And it is painful, heartbreaking, it's crushing your soul. And yet, look to Jesus because He has been there. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Jesus was forsaken so that you and I may be forgiven. God bless you all.